So I'm Tomicah Tillemann. I'm the president of Project Liberty. Project Liberty is dedicated to giving people a voice, a choice, and a stake in the way the internet operates. So what that means in practice is we want individuals to have more of a voice in the way digital platforms operate, more of a choice in the way people's data is used, and give people more agency and control over their data, and more of a stake in the economic value that individuals create online. And to achieve those goals, we build a lot of technology, especially a lot of open source technology. We do a lot of policy work, so we shape the legal code environment and are increasingly engaged on an array of issues around regulatory affairs. And we also work a lot to develop new economic models with amazing partners and some of the foremost economists in the world who are interested in moving us beyond the attention economy model that powers much of the internet today and toward an intention economy model where people will have a much more deliberate relationship with their online engagements.
Great. So it sounds like Project Liberty's mission requires a massive collective effort across different fields of expertise. What does an interdisciplinary approach look like in practice? What kinds of professions or expertise areas, would that include? What would a dream team look like?
Well, I think Project Liberty is unusual in that while there are a number of different initiatives, and we applaud all of them that are working on reforming and fixing the internet, Project Liberty, to the best of my knowledge, is the only one that operates across technical code, legal code, and economic code. And we have really great folks helping us in each of those domains. We have deep partnerships with many of the world's leading educational institutions, so outstanding relationships with Stanford, MIT, Georgetown, Harvard, and a variety of other institutions, including ETH in Switzerland. We have a great crew of collaborators who work with us on policy issues, including a lot of folks with deep experience in policymaking. And then we have, on the economic side, folks like Darren Acemoglu, who won the Nobel Prize in economics last year, who work with us as part of our economic task force to develop the new models that I was speaking about a moment ago.
Great. So Project Liberty works across a multi-layered stack, from the decentralized social networking protocol up to a user interface that non-technical users can intuitively understand and trust. What are some of the challenges you see at each layer of that stack? And what are some of the design principles you'd like to see prioritized?
Absolutely. So, Project Liberty is built as we use a lot of different technology. We started with an open source protocol that operates alongside TCP/IP and HTTP, but is designed to really solve the challenge of how do you give people control over their information and their piece of the social graph. When Project Liberty was founded, there were a couple of brilliant technologists who worked with our founder, Frank McCourt. One of them, Harry, is here today, and came up with the concept of a decentralized social graph that would be a shared graph, where people could have their information, have their relationships, and use those relationships and the information that's stored in our social graph interoperably across many, many different platforms. And to achieve that goal, you need an implementation of the protocol. And that implementation comes in the form of an infrastructure layer called Frequency. Frequency operates as a parachain of Polkadot, Go Polkadot, and we are really excited that early this morning we crossed 2 million people using Frequency. So we now have 2 million lives on Frequency, and we have many, many more, about 7 million in testnet, who are coming, we hope, onto the main platform soon. We are seeing also other pieces of technology that are really important for realizing this vision. We have a single sign-on that's being widely embraced by many different platforms that allows people to operate within the frequency ecosystem and use their data and their social graph across the frequency ecosystem. And we think there will be more technology to come, especially as we start to intersect and interact more with the universe of agentic AI. But we're really excited about the tech that is already out there, and our tech team, again, represented at this conference very ably, has done a great job building tools that advance our mission of giving people more control over their digital lives.
Great. And what is Project Liberty's strategy for achieving network effects when users' existing social media accounts are already locked into centralized platforms? In the face of these large social media monopolies, Facebook owning Instagram and therefore Threads, et cetera, how do you approach user acquisition?
Let me highlight 3 different strategies that we're using. The first is partnerships with a variety of existing platforms and new builders. We have a lot of great work that's underway right now, including an effort that we've engaged in to decentralize the Firehose feed of Blue Sky, and we have a lot of exciting activity on chain as a consequence of that. But we also are working to engage some very, very large platforms. A lot of folks know Project Liberty through the people's bid for TikTok. We have been one of the leading bidders, arguably the leading bidder with a compliant bid to purchase the US assets of TikTok that need to be divested as a result of a law that was passed last April. And there are 170 million US users of TikTok. Our vision has been to move those 170 million users onto frequency infrastructure, again, becoming part of the Polkadot ecosystem by virtue of that, and then have that new cornerstone of 170 million people serve as a building block for an upgraded version of the web where people would have much more control over their information. We're at a point in our work now where US TikTok is neither the largest nor the most consequential platform that we are engaged with. So that's a good position to be in. That's a high-class problem. But if it comes together, it's going to be great. If it doesn't, we're now at a stage where it's a nice to have as opposed to a need to have. But that acquisition strategy is something that we've been pursuing very aggressively as well. The last piece that I'll mention is we have been designing different and better economics for people who participate in digital platforms. Right now, if you look at the dominant platforms in the kind of legacy paradigm of the web, some of the value of those platforms comes from software. Some of the value of those platforms comes from investors and management. But a huge portion of the value comes from the network effects that we all create, that you were alluding to a moment ago, and also the content that we generate online. We don't have good mechanisms, as it stands today, for rewarding the people who create those network effects and who generate that content. And a lot of our work, both with regulatory bodies like the SEC and in the building realm, has been focused on creating new paradigms that will make it easier to fix that. And once you fix that, we believe you're going to have a pretty easy time of bringing people into a new world, because if I'm a creator and I have the choice between generating content for a platform that doesn't recognize my contributions or generating content for a platform that does recognize my contributions, that's a pretty simple choice.
Right. Yeah, and so given this objective to promote data sovereignty, how do you tend to address the scalability dilemma between security, scalability, and decentralization? How do you sort of mitigate those trade-offs between security needs and decentralization goals?
Well, a lot of our work to date has focused on helping legacy platforms move into a Web3 world, a world of decentralization. And in many instances, they already have some scale, some meaningful scale. But what they don't have is the degree of decentralization and individual agency over data that will enable their users to feel good about engaging on those platforms and sharing data in a permissioned and responsible way. So we've focused a lot on that basket of issues. Polkadot is great because it does allow for really massive scale. And our tech team has worked very hard to ensure that frequency can operate at truly massive scale. And we're seeing that play out already as we bring more people onto the chain. We're way beyond proof of concept at this point. We're also working hard to ensure that you have really good security and a high degree of decentralization across the different platforms that are moving onto the network. But it is certainly an equation that we wrestle with, as do most builders, every day.
And so, given those concerns, how do you think governments should regulate the current big tech landscape? What successes are you seeing at the state level, at the national level?
Well, I'll give just one important example that we've been heavily engaged in and where we have seen some really exciting developments. We started about 8 months ago advocating for legislation called the Digital Choice Act, which requires social media platforms in particular, but this can be extended eventually to other platforms, including AI platforms, to facilitate interoperability and data portability. And the problem we have, one of the big problems we have on the internet right now, is that as soon as you get pulled into one of the walled gardens of the big networks, it's very, very challenging and frankly very expensive to leave those walled gardens. Once you have mandates around interoperability and data portability, then you move from being the product, which is what we are right now for Meta or any number of other big platforms where we spend too much time, you move from being the product to a customer again. And that's a much healthier relationship, because if you're a customer and you're unhappy with the way a platform is treating you or the way a platform is using your data, you take your data, you take your audience, you take your relationships, and you move someplace else. And so we had, a few months ago, a groundbreaking development in the state of Utah in the United States. Our founder, Frank McCourt, and I went out and participated in the signing of the Digital Choice Act with the governor of Utah. We now have a series of other states, New York, Vermont, Minnesota, I'm losing track because they're coming in almost daily right now, who are lining up to pass the Digital Choice Act as part of their next legislative sessions. And we are very excited about the potential for interoperability and data portability via open protocols, and it's important that this all be done via open protocols to really fix some of the deep underlying problems that are vexing the internet and all the rest of us right now.
Yes, so where does Project Liberty fit alongside other organizations marching towards the same vision of the internet?
Well, first I would say we are huge fans of and advocates for the great work that's being done in many different realms by many different organizations to facilitate the vision of a more decentralized, democratized internet. This is a problem that is much too large for any one entity, even an entity as ambitious as Project Liberty, to tackle on its own. And so we are very eager to work with others in pursuit of this goal. We have an alliance at Project Liberty that's comprised of about 150 other organizations. And that alliance serves as a real rallying point for like-minded partners and projects all over the world that are seeking to move these principles of decentralization and democratization forward. We would encourage anyone who's participating today or listening to have their organizations take a look at the Alliance, and hopefully you're able to join us in that work, and we'd be delighted to collaborate however we're able.
And what's one thing about your work that would maybe surprise some of the people in this room?
That's a great question and a challenging question, because this is a very sophisticated room. So I'll have to stew hard on that one. I would say two things. 500 years ago today, my 17th great-grandfather, who's a guy named Hugh Broster, woke up in the town of Cheshire, and he walked out his front door, and the folks who lived all around him were serfs. And each morning, they picked up their farming implements, and they went to work cultivating a landscape that they did not control, and they sent most of the produce from that landscape, most of the value that they generated, up to big manor houses. And that was just the way the world worked, and people assumed that that was the way the world always would work. And I think the thing that is surprising to some people is that the problems we see on the internet today seem very new and novel, but in a lot of ways they rhyme with the problems that Hugh Broster experienced 500 years ago. Every morning we wake up, we take out the digital equivalent of farming implements in our phones. We go to work creating value and produce data that we send up to digital manor houses in Silicon Valley or Seattle or Shanghai. And it's great for the handful of folks who are sitting on top of those manor houses. It's a pretty lousy system for everybody else. And the exciting thing to me is that within Hugh Broster's lifetime, that system changed. It ended. And we moved from the feudal architecture that had dominated Europe and many other regions of the world for hundreds of years and into a renaissance. And we had new ideas around individual agency, individual rights, and we ended up creating this remarkable flourishing of creativity and ideas as a consequence of that shift. And I think there is the potential right now to usher in a true digital renaissance if we are successful in shifting the models that are powering the internet right now.
And then as we close out, what's one question you wish I asked but hadn't yet?
I'll talk about two things quickly if I can. I'll expand that to two questions. One is the importance of the pivot from an attention economy to an intention economy. Right now, the way the internet operates for the vast preponderance of the sites that people spend their time on is really grounded in this idea of making content as addictive as possible, using that addiction to gather and scrape as much of our personal data as possible, and then using that personal data to manipulate our behavior. This is, again, a really, really lousy model. And nobody, I don't think, sat in a room and said, oh, we're going to design this horrible, devious system to power the internet, but that is nonetheless the way the system is functioning right now. We need to move from that attention-based model to an intention-based model where people have the opportunity to, on a much more deliberate and intentional basis, identify the types of products, experiences, goods, and services that they would like to engage with, and then structure their own content feeds around those priorities. And when you do that, two things happen that are really exciting. The first is that people have much better, healthier experiences online. So if you look at almost every metric of digital satisfaction and the value that people feel they are getting from their time on the internet, it goes way up, not shockingly, when you anchor on human intent. The other thing that happens, happily, is that platforms become much more valuable when you make this change, because intent is a much better predictor of behavior than inference, which is how they're functioning right now. So if you look at the one big example at scale where this is played out, which is Pinterest under Bill Reddy, and we've done a lot of great work in collaboration with Pinterest, they have seen their market capitalization more than double as they have moved from an attention-based model toward an intention-based model. And we have, fortunately at Project Liberty, had an amazing group of partners and thought leaders helping think through what this would look like, both as it relates to our bid for TikTok, but also the internet more broadly. And that's an area where I hope there will be a lot of building and a lot of creativity in years to come, because there's a lot of room to build something that is wildly better than the broken status quo we're stuck with right now. The other thing I would just say very quickly is that we need a lot of builders to help realize this vision. We need people to come build on frequency. And one of the great things about the vision that Harry Braxton and others who've been involved in the creation of this technology have put forward is that it really solves the cold start problem in a really powerful way. I'm a recovering venture capitalist, and one of the challenges that we would see when folks would approach us in my venture capital days is they'd have an awesome concept, but taking an idea from 0 to 1 as a builder in our current internet paradigm is really hard, because Meta and X and a handful of other big platforms have hoovered up all of the attention and all of the activity that's taking place online. If you can access a shared social graph and you can tap in to the creativity and the data and the community that exists within that shared social graph on a permission basis, then you can speed run the cold start challenge, which holds a lot of otherwise very promising projects back as they're trying to achieve scale.
And so in that vein, is there one piece of advice you'd give to people who come from non-technical backgrounds who want to get involved, and a piece of advice you'd give to the builders who are here with us today?
Well, for the non-technical folks, I would say that in my experience, and I've been very fortunate in my career to be involved in a number of big successful systems change projects where you had really complicated systems that were operating one way, and by systems, I mean like huge flows of capital or huge flows of technology, and you move them to operating a different way. That only happens in a meaningful sense when you get a lot of different sectors working together. So you need technologists, you need social leaders and civil society leaders, you need policymakers and government all working together and coming together to create change. So, especially for the non-technical folks in the room and watching this, stake out some space at the intersection of different communities like private sector, public sector, and civil society, and work at that intersection, because you're going to be able to do awesome things there. For the builders, we need your help, and the world needs your help. This, again, is much, much bigger than Project Liberty. It's much bigger than any of us in this room. If we want to live in an AI world where we have agency, that thing that makes us human, the ability to make decisions, we need to solve this problem really quickly. We need to develop architecture that will give people the ability to control their information and move it to the platforms that meet their needs, rather than becoming indentured servants or serfs, to go back to the example that I used earlier, that are beholden to the whims of 1 or 2 or 3 very large platforms that dominate our lives and control our information. I think this is about as close to an existential challenge as we find in the realm of digital technology, and it's one that's going to play out in the next few years. So, for the builders in the room in particular, please get in the game. We need you if we're going to solve this.
And finally, what are you most excited about for the future?
Well, I am excited about the potential to create an internet that we deserve. And we have been fortunate in the course of our work at Project Liberty to spend a lot of time with leaders who were present at the creation, and in many cases played defining roles in the creation of earlier generations of the internet. People like Dave Clark, who worked on TCP/IP, or Tim Berners-Lee, who worked on HTTP. And what they have told us, which they're happy to tell anyone, is that we are asking the internet to do a lot of things today that it was never intended to do. They created the internet with the goal of having it be a wonderful, decentralized, democratized space that would provide more people with more opportunities to create and do amazing things. Unfortunately, that's not quite what we are living with right now. And solving this problem requires going back to the very bottom of the stack and fixing things at the protocol layer. And we've done that with DSNP, the foundational protocol that I mentioned earlier. But it also requires building amazing apps and amazing infrastructure that will be able to take advantage of those new changes. And so if we can pull that off, again, the potential for an internet where we all have a voice in the way platforms operate, a choice in the way our information is used, and a stake in the economic value that we generate online is about as exciting as anything I can come up with. I think that reorientation of the digital economy and the digital world into something that is much better aligned with our values is a pretty awesome thing to be excited about. The flip side of that is, we've started to recognize, and Frank McCourt, our founder at Project Liberty, has been very vocal in saying, right now we have societies and institutions that are built on one set of values. They're built on values of openness and transparency and accountability and democracy. And we have technologies that are built on a very different set of values, values of surveillance and centralization and control. And one of two things is going to happen. Either the technology is going to have to shift and embrace the values that our societies are built on and become more decentralized and more democratized. Or, unfortunately, what we're seeing happen right now is that the institutions and our societies are going to move in the opposite direction. And they're going to become more surveillance-based, and they're going to become more centralized. So we need to move very, very rapidly to get our tech reoriented in the right direction. Again, getting that right, moving our technology in the direction of decentralization, the direction of democratization, is a massively exciting opportunity. I think it's what brings many of us together here at the Web3 Summit, and it's, I hope, going to be the basis for a lot of the collaboration and partnership that will emerge from our conversations.
Great. Thanks so much for your time and all your insights.
My pleasure. Thank you, Zoe.